One of the true facts about Christmas is that in the midst of all of our celebration and in our joy and festivity, that quite true for many of us is at the same time a mixture of emotion. And that mixture is that we also mourn during this time. That some of us may have lost significant people in our lives, and when Christmas rolls around, there just is this true emptiness there. And so we get this strange mix of contrasting emotion. And I would contend that if we are to really celebrate Christmas, if we are to really understand the depth of Christmas, we need to ask a fundamental question, and that is, what is God doing with this thing called Christmas? Why is Christmas here? And I am absolutely a firm believer that the contrast of emotions that we have, that the pain, the darkness that we might feel at Christmas time, that is exactly why Christmas exists. And that God is moving in the midst of those things. And there we find the true power of Christmas. To touch on this topic, I want us to walk through several of the scriptures that we read this morning. Because by walking through them, we will come to understand what God is doing for us at Christmas time, and that He began this from the very beginning of time. To start with, turning to our Old Testament lesson, Psalm 18. Psalm 18 was written by King David, and King David was, as a young lad, grew up as a shepherd. He became a great fighter. He fought in the army of King Saul. He became a great military leader on his own, and eventually was anointed king over Israel, and perhaps is the most famous, one of the wealthiest, most powerful kings that Israel has ever known. And it is this man who pens these words. I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. So a great military leader saying, it's not about me, it's not about my army, it's about my God, who is my fortress and my defender. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He's my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who's worthy of praise, and I'm saved from my enemies. See, King David, he knew about troubles in life. As a young man, he went out into the battlefield, and the first battle he engaged with was Goliath, an overwhelming task that all the other soldiers ran from, and there he discovered the Lord was with him. He gained favor with Saul and became a part of Saul's army. And he loved Saul. He fought for Saul. He was willing to lay down his life for his king. He would minister to Saul. Saul would have fits of emotion. And King David, the musician, the artist, he would play his harp and he would try to calm down the king. And there's one story that's recorded that while he was playing his lyre, the king picked up a spear and hurled it across the room, trying to impale David into the wall. So this guy he was defending, the guy he was working for, the guy he was willing to lay down his life for, wanted him dead. And so David, in this fit of just confusion and bearing the brunt of the sinful, prideful arrogance and paranoia of King Saul, had to run out into the mountains and hide in the caves from King Saul. Eventually he himself became king. And he became powerful, became wealthy. He became a man who influenced his whole region. But his family life was pretty pathetic. I mean, if you want to watch soap operas, you don't even have to watch soap operas. Just read the section on David and his family. It's a mess. He's got incest. He's got abuse, he's got greed, he's got paranoia, he's got a coup. One of his sons, Absalom, rises up against his father, wants the throne before David is dead, and so he launches a coup. He raises a huge army, and the people rally around him because he's this good-looking, charismatic guy, and they rally to his forces. And eventually, David almost reluctantly raises an army to go out against his son, and David's army wins. And word comes back to David that his son Absalom is dead, the coup is over, everything is peaceful now. And you would think that a king who was vested only in his power would rejoice. But David doesn't. His heart is broken from his son's betrayal. And now his heart is devastated as he receives the news that his son has died. And David, this man of faith, cries out to heaven and he says, Absalom, my son, would I have died instead of you. He's crushed. The darkness of death has seized his soul, and as the steely cold eyes of death stare at him, he looks to his Lord. Because David understands something. He knows that in the face of death, with all of his strength, with all of his prowess, with all of his title, it doesn't mean a thing. Because he's vulnerable before death. The death of his kid and his own mortality. He pens those words from the 23rd Psalm. Even when I go into the valley of the shadow of death, that darkness, I will fear no evil, not because of who I am. I will fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod, your staff, O Lord, they comfort me. David knew that in the face of death, he was powerless. He could do nothing. In the face of this eternal state of being. I mean, we live with so many temporary things in this life, but death is pretty permanent, folks. And in the midst of that permanence, in the midst of that vast mystery of what death is, David said, I got nothing. And all I can do is turn to you, God, my rock, my fortress, my salvation. So my Christmas question for you is, what about you? Where are you in the midst of this thing called death? You might say, thanks, Pastor Tyler. You have absolutely ruined my Christmas talking about death. This is kind of a downer sermon for right before Christmas. Come on, be a little happier, huh? Please be a little happier. I want to read you something. This is from one of my favorite Christmas carols. It's probably one of your favorites too, called What Child Is This? It's yours, Tara. Tara's all excited about this. The second verse, I want to read the second verse to you. Listen to this. Why lies he in such mean estate? In other words, how come this baby, the Son of God, has to be born out in a stable? Why has he got to be born out in a feedlot? For crying out loud, that's horrible. Where ox and ass are feeding. Good Christian, fear. Good Christian fear for sinners here. In other words, we as sinners, we're in a pretty tough state because our sin, my friends, separates us from God. Our God is holy. He can't do anything with sinful condition. And so here we are, sinful, and we can't relate to a God who is holy. So we are separated. And this hymn says, good Christians, fear for sinners here. The silent word is pleading.